I'm Rian Keating, and you've tuned into Spotlight. It's a pleasure to welcome back Kelly Bishop. Kelly, welcome back. You had come to New York at 18 with $70 in your pocket. So what was your first impression of New York?
Well, I lived my life. If I didn't like the mountains, which I did, I love the mountains in Colorado, but I think it came from the first Barbara Stanwyck movie I ever saw, the city. I wanted to be in the city. I thought it was the most glamorous place. And of course I came and it was absolutely glamorous. I was lonesome the first few months, but so involved in the ballet that it was really a matter of, well, all ballet dancers do that. It doesn't matter where you are. And as an actress now I find the same thing. I say it doesn't matter what the location is as long as I'm doing the work. So the same thing with dancers. If there's a place to go and dance, a place to take class or study, that's what you live and breathe for anyway. So it wasn't too scary. Actually, it was more frightening when I started thinking about it than it was just getting there, because I had this goal. And
your mother had come to New York many years later. What was her first impression?
Yeah, it was very interesting. She moved here because she'd also had a little fantasy about living in New York. And she didn't make it. She lived here for about a year and a half and just couldn't take it, moved back to Northern California. But she said to me, if I had any idea of what I was sending you to, I never would have let you go. She was as naive as I was, and she just sent me off, and it was fine. I've really been fortunate. Very, very little negative has happened to me.
You had come here to audition for American Ballet Theater. How did you find that experience?
Well, devastating, because I was trained by Dmitri Romanoff, who was the regisseur of Ballet Theater, and was at that time. And I went to the audition. It was kind of understood that I would join the company in the fall after my graduation from high school. And I can say honestly, I was certainly qualified. I was a good enough dancer. And I went to the audition, and Lucia Chase didn't seem to want to look at me. But I was called back to the final anyway. Went to the final and didn't get it. I was so shocked that I didn't even cry. I was devastated. I was horrified, traumatized, and everything else. And it was obviously the first lesson I got was don't believe anything until it's on paper. But it never occurred to me, if everybody said I was going to be in ballet theater, that I wouldn't be in ballet theater. So the next thing to do was simply to survive. Lesson number 2 in the Big Apple. So in those days, Radio City had a full year-round corps de ballet besides the Rockettes and the acts. And it's sort of what ballet dancers did. If they couldn't get into the Met, as also another year-round job, because ballet companies in those days really had small seasons, so you had a lot of time on your own. You either went to the Met or you went to Radio City, which was kind of the bottom of the barrel. Nobody wanted to do it because it was 4 shows a day, and because it wasn't high art, certainly. You wore your toe shoes for a lot of shows, but it wasn't Les Sylphides. So I went off to the music hall, and every Thursday they would have I think it was every Thursday, an open audition, and got my job and started working.
Donna McKechnie was in the same situation, and when she finally made it to Radio City, she said that audition was much harder than the ABT audition.
It was. I remember having to do 16 fouettes on point, which aren't easy, on a slippery floor, because the rehearsal rooms at the music hall, I'm sure they've done the floor over by now, but it was the old wood floor painted black, I remember, and they were very slippery in point shoes. And I got through it, but I don't know how. Yes, the audition, the ballet audition at Radio City was much harder than the one at Ballet Theater that I didn't pass. And then, of course, I had a scholarship at Ballet Theater, and I would continue to take classes there, and I'd look at the girls that got into the company and just get so enraged because they weren't as good as I was, and I knew they weren't. I think years later I figured out one of the mistakes I made in the Ballet Theater audition was dancing as fully as I could, and they were not looking for soloists, they were looking for corps de ballet. And here I was flying through the air and doing one more extra turn, and I was the kind of dancer that had a lot of flair. I was not a lyrical dancer, I was a harder dancer. And I have a feeling that didn't help my chances either, but it never occurred to me that if I danced down a little bit and looked like everybody else, I might have gotten the job. I don't know.
So tell me, how did doing 4 shows a day on toes at Radio City change your perception about being a ballet dancer?
Yes, it cured me of point work. And 5 shows on Christmas week, all never, because we were little snowflakes. The first Christmas I worked at the music hall, putting on point shoes five times, even though you did maybe 2 numbers or 1 very long number, on point. On a stage, it's hard. You know, there's an equity rule that, and I'm sure with AGMA, American Guild of Musical Artists, there's probably a rule about the floor. But with AGVA, which is what Radio City was under, which is variety artists, there's no rule about the state of the floor. Now they use that that kind of rubberized thing for the surface, but it was a cement base, and the rules are that you don't dance on cement because obviously there's no give in it, and the more give you can get in a wooden floor, the more you can spring off and also, you know, save your muscles. And so dancing on point on cement, basically, or on concrete, can do terrible things to your feet and your body. It's certainly pain. And it was about that time it was very good discipline for me, because I had never liked point class very much as a kid. I went because I had to, but I found point work very painful anyway. And I didn't want to do it. I couldn't believe some of those nights when I was putting my toe shoes on for the 5th time, when my feet were swollen and red and blistered, that I was doing it again in the same day. I couldn't believe that, but I did. However, that really cured me. I think it was not too long after that I stopped even taking point class, because I didn't like it. It hurt too much.
You had later done Vegas and the World's Fair. How would you...
That was exciting. When I went to, right out of the music hall, I went to the World's Fair. And I worked for Michael Kidd in a very big extravaganza. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there were 32 dancers and 32 singers and 32 swimmers in that company. So it was a huge show, not unlike the music hall. But what I loved were meeting dancers who were good, qualified dancers, who had some life in them. Ballet dancers, as I talked to you before, are very disciplined, introverted, quiet, aesthetic kind of people. Not all of them. But the Broadway type dancer, now I'd met my first kind of gypsy sort of dancer, and there were funny people with great sense of humor and a real slap on the back, and play jokes on each other and laugh over things, and I loved meeting these people, knowing that they were dancers too.
Did that help you come out of your shell?
Yes, yes. It always takes me a while, even to this day. I'll start rehearsals, and what probably looks like a haughty attitude is nothing but shyness. The first 3 or 4 days of rehearsal, I'm rather quiet and reserved. And then as I get to know people and feel a little more comfortable in my environment, I start to clown around a little bit. I also have a kind of sassy mouth. So I'm always coming out with some real cracks. Some of them seem like real put-downs. I don't mean them that way, but I hear things in my head. Someone will say something, and I hear the comeback. I hear the line, and it comes right out of my mouth.
Oh, you just can't resist.
I'm sure I've hurt my reputation doing that, but it's not intentional.
Well, it's been said that you've developed a character called Kelly Westbrook as a result of that.
That's where Kelly came from. That's where Kelly Bishop came from. Yes, I was doing... in the chorus, a Broadway show called was a revival of On the Town, which was not successful. But just for amusement, after you know all your work in the chorus, I mean, you know all your dances and you know all your costume changes, all the things that you have to do, there's still a lot of energy there when you're not working on a role. Now that I'm in the principal category, you don't do that quite so much because you're always working on your character. And there was an actor who was a singer that I would pass in the theater. Just as he was making his change, I was making mine, and we would talk to you, we would just speak to you, we would greet one another, really. And we would make up characters by which we greeted one another. And I made up Kelly Westbrook, who was a very spoiled, nasty, rich girl, who obnoxious, totally obnoxious. Well, he started calling me Kelly all the time, and then his wife started calling me Kelly, and then a group of friends started calling me Kelly. And being named Carol, it's a nice name, and it has an E on it like Carol Lombard, so that I always liked. But no one ever put the E on it. I mean, why would they, unless you tell them? You don't have a nickname when your name is Carol. And I always wanted a nickname when I was a kid. Now suddenly this Kelly's coming up, and which I kind of liked because it's androgynous, and it's kind of a tough, happy name. And that group of people started calling me Kelly, then introduced me to other groups who would then only know me as Kelly, and pretty soon, by the time we did Chorus Line, Michael Bennett was calling me Kelly. And it was at that point that I started that became my name. Then when I had to change it because of the unions, I was in SAG as Carol Bishop Miller, which was my married name, which I never really intended to have, but there is a Carol Bishop who was in SAG before I was. So when Chorus Line started looking successful, and I thought maybe I'll get a movie, I didn't want to confuse people as they were just getting to know my name by having 2 different names, so I just switched everything over to Kelly. And I'm glad I did, I think.
After you left the chorus line, what sort of changes did you go through in terms of having won the Tony? And I think when something like that happens, you're on a high.
Yeah. You go through a lot of things about Tonys, and I've talked to other actors who've won them. I have the good fortune of having a lot of friends who've won Tony Awards. At one point I started thinking maybe it's not that special. And I thought, that's ridiculous. You just have special friends. As a matter of fact, one of my friends had called me after she won the Tony, or I'd called her to congratulate her, and she seemed kind of, yeah, it's nice. I said, what's wrong? And she said, oh, I don't know. No, it's fine. And I said, oh, I know what you're doing. I said, some nights you go out there and you think you're the greatest actress in the world, and that you deserved it and you should get it, right? Yeah. And then some nights you go out there and you think that you're terrible and that you didn't deserve it and everybody knows it. And she went, yeah. And then I said, then there are nights that you go out there and you think that everybody in the audience is sitting there with a notepad, checking every move that you make and saying, well, that was Tony, but that wasn't a Tony thing. And it's that kind of pressure that you put on yourself. And she said, yes, it's exactly what she'd been going through. And I said, take it as a wonderful gift, as a great gesture from your peers, which it is. It's a wonderful thing to have. And don't get too serious about it, but you do start doing things on your head. I'm sure that happens with Oscars and with the Emmys and everything else. Especially when you first go into auditions and you're known sort of for having this Tony Award and it's a new thing in your life. You put pressure on yourself thinking that you have to be absolutely stunningly brilliant at the first reading, or whatever the situation is, or picking up a script and doing a cold reading. You don't have to be. But that pressure that you put on yourself because you think everybody's expecting that of you is very painful and can be very detrimental.
So how can you alleviate that pressure?
I just finally, well, again, I had gotten into analysis when I was doing Chorus Line, and I had a lot of good discussions about the Tony and how I felt about it. That helped me to understand it a great deal. And I really see it as sort of like a party favor. I don't mean to negate it because it's a real privilege to have one. But it sits up on my mantle, and it's wonderful when you're not working. You look at it and you go, you see, you are good. And it's a very pretty award anyway. It makes any interior look beautiful. It's a nice thing to have. It's a memento of a moment in your life. And of course, Chorus Line's a major moment in my life. And I'm very proud of it. I'd love to get another one someday for some other show. Yeah, actually, my big goal is I'd like to have a Tony for a play. That's what I would like. Musical's fine. But then the next step now, I'd like to have a Tony for a play.
You were in a show called Piano Bar, which
for which I didn't win a Tony.
Well, it was off Broadway, but it gave you a chance to sing more than you ever had.
Or wanted to. Yes, it did.
How did you feel about that?
I was terrified. I was terrified. People have no idea, and I've finally gotten over it, how uncomfortable I am about singing. I like people with pretty voices that are really well trained. I imagine I do improve when I take voice lessons, but then I get lazy about it, and I don't go, and I don't get discouraged in a depressed sort of way. I just go, oh, you're never going to sing, and so don't worry about it. And I do play those kind of roles where it doesn't really require that kind of singing. But I got into Piano Bar, and the job was offered to me. I had not seen, there had been a showcase of it. I hadn't seen it. I didn't really know anything about it, except the director kept saying to me it's a garbage opera, i.e. it's really an opera. It's all sung. There's no dialogue. It's only sung. And I said, are you sure you know my voice? And he said, oh yeah. I said, we've heard we have the Chorus Line album. I said, well, I wasn't singing the high part, And they said, no, we want you. Well, I was so frightened, so terrified. And it was just through the musical director and the director, their support and their encouragement, that I just finally said, okay. And yeah, I came out very well in the show. It was actually very good for me. What I do with singing now is call it an extension of dialogue. I do have very good pitch. I have a good ear, and that can be a problem because I try to listen to myself and criticize as I go, and any singer or anyone who studied singing knows that you can't do that, but I do it anyway. Now I'm to a point where I say, look, if they hired me to sing this song, I'll sing the song. I don't know why they want me to sing the song, but I'll sing the song. And I think I told you earlier that I keep having this terrible little nightmare that I'm going to open the paper one day after the opening of a show and on a musical, and everything's going to be glorious, and at the end they're going to say, "And Kelly Bishop, please stop singing." And they have never done it. I've even done shows where other people's voices have been criticized and mine hasn't, and I can't figure it out. It's because I act songs. That's what I just say. I act on pitch. That's what it's all about.
Well, I think that's the whole key right there.
I guess it is, because I'm not that picky about other people's voices. I like people with interesting voices or voices that aren't particularly beautiful, but I somehow think that mine is supposed to be. And so it's that same old performance thing. We just beat ourselves up trying to make ourselves perfect. And
another thing you're very well known for is your performance in An Unmarried Woman.
Oh, that.
And for your first film, how was that experience? Did you find it terrifying?
Not terrifying. It was hard because I didn't know anything about movie making, and I again, being shy, especially those first few days of filming, doing that same old kind of reserved trip. I was afraid to ask too many questions for fear of looking like a fool or irritating the director or something. So I just paid a lot of attention, which is the way I learned everything in life, particularly living in the chorus. After you get done with all your chorus things, you sit and you watch the director work with the principals, and that's how I learned acting. So that's sort of how I learned movies. And I learn something new each time I do one. I certainly haven't begun to find out what I have to find out about it. It was a little upsetting. I mean, I didn't know master shots. Fortunately, I'm the kind of performer that has a tendency to repeat. I don't change my performances a great deal. And I learned in films very fast, the very first day, that worked. I.e., if my hand was here in the scene when you shot me this way, it's better be that way when you shoot me that way, which had never occurred to me before. But since I've done films, I am a real fan of editors. I think the editors really can make or break a film. And apparently editors like me, or so they tell me, because I am very consistent, so that they don't have to have trouble matching up the shots.
What about makeup men?
Oh, man. Oh, I know what you're going to ask me, yes. Well, I have since learned that I have to be very careful about what people do with my makeup. The makeup man on that film, I don't remember his name. I didn't like what he was doing with my makeup. It didn't look right to me. I mean, I was looking in the mirror and I didn't like the way I looked. And I kept saying, well, don't you think you should do this? And he kept reminding me of how many films he'd done. And I certainly had no answer for him because it was my first film. So I pretty well let him do what he wanted to do, although it bothered me. And then I saw the film and said, you were right, And most really good makeup people will say to you, look, you've been making up your face for 20 years. I just met you today. You tell me what you want. That's what the good makeup people do. This man didn't do that. Some of the people look good in the film. The more important roles look better than I did.
Well, you certainly had a very emotional role, being a manic depressive.
It was fine. Actually, ultimately, it was fine the way I looked because it was good for the character.
But how did you prepare for the role?
I worked with a coach on that because films don't rehearse. Now, Paul Mazursky does rehearse a little bit, although the rehearsals were like 2-3 weeks before the filming. I would have been more comfortable probably closer to filming because I get into that. Well, a theater performer, you go from rehearsals to previews to performance. And I like to rehearse because that's where I find all my things up to a point, and then you're ready for your audience because they're going to tell you the rest of it. Since I didn't have that rehearsal time and I wanted so much to do a good job on the film, I found myself a coach through an acting teacher, and he gave me exercises and worked with me and took me to see films of manic depressives and helped me a great deal. I think a lot of actors do that. I don't think they talk about it very much, but the more work you can do day to day on a character, certainly the better you're going to be when you finally get in front of a camera.
When you're working on a film, it's not always filmed in sequence, so really when you're doing a scene, you don't have the chance to build it. How do you get around that and can just turn on that emotional peak? What
you really have to do is really get your character down. I mean, the only way I can do it is to follow the sequence of scenes, the chronology of it, and get each thing very specific in my mind as to what I want to do, and then it's okay because then you can pull it out and go and do it. Almost never are they shot in sequence. Working up the right moment is hard because there's waiting, and it's not, you can't say I have exactly 15 minutes before we shoot. they might say to you, in 15 minutes we're going to shoot. Then you go to shoot, or you do your camera rehearsal. Then you go and somebody has to do your hair and somebody has to mess with you all the time. Then you get in front of the camera and invariably they'll say we have to reload the cameras. So I still find that a problem. I want to do more films so that I can get that worked out for myself. Different actors do different things. Some of them can really tune out and do their crocheting. Some of them really go and pore over their scripts. Some of them sit around and talk to the camera people. I haven't figured out what to do with that in-between time, because the tension, for me, the tension just keeps building during that time. I haven't found how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Did you find it surprising that An Unmarried Woman was written by a man?
Yes, somewhat. Paul Mazursky is very sensitive to women, and I believe even said to me that he wanted to sort of do that film as a tribute to some of the women he'd known. And I know my character was based on a real woman that was a friend of his. I think it was part, I hope I'm not mistaken about this, but his way of trying to understand women a little more. You know, just having gone through life and been a man and being sensitive. Yeah, I thought he did a wonderful job, and he was very open to improvisation. So that was great. Yeah, he's very easy to work with that way. He's a good director. He's a very good director. I'm glad to see things are going very well for him. When
the film was released, all of a sudden you found yourself in the position of being a spokeswoman for single women.
Yes. I find that so strange. The only thing I can say is I guess they believe your character that much. But yeah, I would get, you know, the film company will ask you to do, you know, talk shows or whatever, mainly to promote the film, which that's part of your job. That's fine with me. But then I get on the show and I find it was a whole thing about single people, for instance, with Unmarried Woman. And I'm no expert on single people. I was a single woman at the time. It helped. I could talk about my own personal experiences, but the interviewers would ask me questions as if I had a PhD and, you know, spinsterhood or something. And I kept thinking, why am I here? I know I'm here to promote Unmarried Woman, but it was very funny. It happened to me a few times. But that's happened. You know, you get into a show and then you're doing it, a talk show, and suddenly it's about the subject of the play. But it's not about you as an actress. It's about you as an expert on the subject, which I'm not most of the time.
Do you find that hard to deal with?
No, I just talk.
You had once said that relationships caused you a lot of problems because you were passionate about your work, but you seem to work that out now.
Yes, I'm very happily married to a wonderful man who's really supportive and intelligent, cares about his career too. Yeah, I found, and I remember even saying it in the tape sessions for Chorus Line, that my relationships would come and go. I mean, it might be 3 years, 4 years, 6 years. But that the career, even though I was in the chorus for so many years, was constant. That's something that I always it was always there. It was a constant in my life. And the theater people or my fellow actors do feel like family to me. Yeah, I have worked it out. I did get, I finally got to a point in my life where I decided I was either going to find the man I really wanted or live alone, very dramatically, the rest of my life. And of course, naturally, about the time I got very specific about what I wanted, he absolutely walked right into my life and started wooing me, and was so easygoing and bright and funny and independent that it all worked out very nicely. So.
Well, you've been very fortunate, and yes. I appreciate your taking time out to visit with us.
Oh, you're welcome, anytime.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
You've been watching Spotlight with guest Kelly Bishop. I'm Rian Keating. Spotlight airs Tuesday at 8:30 in the evening on Manhattan Cable's Channel D, and again Saturday mornings at 11:30 on Channel C. Be sure to join us next week when our guest will be the producer of The Fantastics, Laurie Noto. Until next week, this is Rian Keating. Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Rian Keating. Today we're visiting Laurie Noto, the producer of The Fantastic. And we're at the Sullivan Street Theater. Mr. Noto, welcome to the show. Now this is going into its 25th year.
Your show or to my show? Which show am I being welcomed to?
I don't know if I'm being welcomed.
You know, I want to tell you, I was so pleased to hear you say Noto. Everybody says, no-to. And I was delighted to hear Noto. That's where I grew up. Hey, Noto.
This is going into its 25th year this month, and thinking back 25 years ago when you saw the Barnard production with Susan Watson and Ron Liebman, what was your first impression of it?
I thought it was kind of crazy, actually. No, I had my experience with it was before I saw it on a stage of any kind. I had heard it done in an acting workshop where Mr. Baker had brought it. And he came to take over somebody's class and being summoned almost summarily, actually, to take over the class for another director. He brought some scripts with him, and he had each of the kids, and the boys and the girls, separately read the opening speech of the boy and the girl. So I had no